2022 has been an excellent year for video games. God of War Ragnarok, Elden Ring, Immortality, there have been a wide array of brilliant games from a bunch of different genres that have dropped over the last 12 months, but there have also been just as many that have disappointed. Of course, I just want to stress that that doesn't mean all of the following games I'm about to talk about are bad. In fact, some of them are still really recommendable despite their flaws, but there is no denying that they didn't hit the lofty heights that fans and critics expected from them. So with that in mind, I'm Josh from WhatCulture.com, and these are the 10 most disappointing video games of 2022. Number 10, Saints Row. Now, some gamers may tell you that Saints Row wasn't a disappointment at all, because everyone expected it to be bad to begin with. And while yeah, there was a vocal section of the player base that wrote the title off as soon as it was announced, so off-putting was the humor and new aesthetic, the initial trailers did look promising. The writing and outdated stabs at hipster culture might not have impressed, but the open world anarchy still looked like a lot of fun, as did the extensive customization options. It's a testament to just how bad the eventual game was then, that it still managed to disappoint players, even those who only expected brainless fun like me. That's because Saints Row 2022 is not just an underwhelming game, it's a truly turgid one. Playing like a 5 out of 10 open world actioner from 2009, everything about this reboot feels archaic. From the clumsy combat to the mundane mission objectives to the insulting graphics and technical hiccups. If you told someone this was a Duke Nukem Forever situation where the game started development a decade ago, they'd probably believe you. But even as an old school throwback, it's not charming because the glitches and insulting AI make it virtually unplayable, or at least it was at launch. Whether you're a die-hard fan or an intrigued newcomer, Saints Row just has nothing to offer anyone. Number 9, Dying Light 2. A common theme on this list is that a lot of the most disappointing games feel like relics of a bygone era, and Dying Light 2 is no different. Had this sequel launched even 4 years ago, it probably would have resonated more with players, but unfortunately its Ubisoft-esque approach to open world design today feels needlessly bloated and rickety. Though the core tenets of what made the original title so memorable are still there, those of course being the excellent parkour system and the punchy melee combat, they're diluted through a quantity over quality approach to new systems and mechanics that muddy the game's tight focus. It is at least ambitious though, striving to be closer to an RPG with branching narrative choices and fleshed out side missions and characters, but sadly, the writing of this new content is just not up to scratch. Cutscenes drag on, characters are frustratingly one note, and the world building is nothing we haven't seen in a million post-apocalyptic games before. It is a shame because there's a lot to enjoy at the heart of this sequel, but like its worst inspirations, you have to cut through so much BS just to get there. It's not as bad as Saints Row by a long shot, but it is a bit more disappointing because it had way more potential. Number 8, Ghostwire Tokyo. Tango Gameworks was, at one point anyway, one of the most promising new studios in the industry. With The Evil Within, they crafted a promising debut, and with its sequel, delivered one of the defining survival horror games of a generation. All eyes were on their third project then, Ghostwire Tokyo, to follow up that winning streak. A shift to a first-person style of gameplay might have been a risk, but there was trust that the devs could pull it off. After all, they actually released a first-person mode for The Evil Within 2 post-launch, so it's not like they didn't have any practice. Unfortunately though, after a bunch of delays and internal shifts, Ghostwire Tokyo didn't live up to its potential. Repetitive gameplay, meandering pacing, and a story that didn't really get going until right at the very end. While there are parts of the title to enjoy, and you will probably still get a kick out of it now that it's heavily discounted and expectations are low, it sadly didn't live up to the quality that we know the talented people at Tango are capable of. Number 7, Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. There's nothing more deflating than a video game that has clear potential releasing way before it's ready. We've seen botched launches take down everything from Cyberpunk 2077 to Battlefield 4, and sadly, Pokemon Scarlet and Violet is the latest casualty. The second major Pokemon game this year, Scarlet and Violet, by all accounts, is an inspired, refreshing installment in their long-running franchise. Expanding on the classic gameplay by implementing more open-world RPG elements and minigames, it's the most ambitious sequel sequel in years, but that ambition has come at a price. That's because the latest Pokemon is, quite frankly, unacceptable. Plagued by bugs and glitches, some hilarious, others game-breaking, there's no way that this was developer Game Freak's intended vision. Production-wise, it doesn't feel AAA, with ugly graphics and presentation dragging down what should be a vibrant and lived-in world. This is one of the biggest franchises in the whole world, but it doesn't appear that the developers have the resources that they require to produce a polished and premium experience. It feels like a product that's cut a lot of technical corners, which is so disappointing when the gameplay itself is so good. Number 6, Rainbow Six Extraction. Rainbow Six Extraction is the kind of idea that only works if you strike while the iron is hot. Spun off a time-limited co-op mode from Rainbow Six Siege, where players teamed up to kill aliens and complete objectives, Ubisoft decided there was enough potential there for the mode to headline its own game. With a few aesthetic tweaks and a much bigger budget, Rainbow Six Quarantine was put into development. Unfortunately, then the entire world was put into quarantine. Delayed multiple times over the pandemic and changing its name to avoid association with real-world happenings, Rainbow Six Extraction finally released at the very start of this year, and it was fine. It was a game. It was okay if you were playing with some mates. In fact, it was the perfect Game Pass fodder. A decent time with no barrier to entry that successfully blended the mechanics of Siege with a new, more explosive setting. However, it was not a memorable title, and it arguably didn't warrant the resources required to flesh it out into a full game at all. Number 5, the Dark Pictures anthology, The Devil in Me. Supermassive Games was riding a renewed high at the midpoint of this year. Their successor to Until Dawn, The Quarry, signaled a major return to form for the studio, acting as a standout horror adventure game with pristine production values, buckets of gore, and a level of polish that had evaded the team in recent years. Consequently, all eyes were on the devs' second release of 2022 and the latest in their Dark Pictures anthology series, The Devil in Me. Though the previous entries were a little bit hit and miss, expectations were high for this one. Not only had Supermassive Games been going from strength to strength, but the concept of The Devil in Me, that being a filmmaking crew trapped in a deadly building full of Saw-esque traps and games, the top-level talent and inclusion of one of Hollywood's greatest actors in Jesse Buckley, all promised big things. Unfortunately though, the latest entry in the Dark Pictures anthology turned out to be just, well, another entry in the Dark Pictures anthology. Clumsy new mechanics, thin characters, and a lack of scares sucked the promise out of this release and made The Quarry look like a fluke rather than a confident new beginning. Number 4, Diablo Immortal. For a little while, it looked like Diablo Immortal could be the biggest redemption story of the year. Blizzard's mobile spin-off was infamously criticized when it was first announced, not helped by the company's own arrogant assertions that fans should just shut up and be happy with the franchise's move to phones, but the end product did kinda seem solid. When fans finally installed the free-to-play title this year, they were impressed by the excellent visuals, addictive gameplay loop, and wealth of content. But then, the grind set in, and it was clear that once you hit the 20-hour mark or so, Diablo Immortal was an over-monetized mess. Hiding some of the more nefarious business practices until the late game, it became apparent that Blizzard was pushing fans to microtransactions at every turn to skip the grind and keep the progression going. Even worse, it seemed as though high-paying players were incentivized by pay-to-win systems that gave them an edge in PvP battles. This huge disappointment led to a barrage of review-bombing crusades, and rightly so. Blizzard was so close to having something special, but ultimately gave into greed at the last hurdle. Number 3, CROSSFIRE X. You probably forgot that CROSSFIRE X even came out this year, didn't you? In a way, it was expected that this lifeless first-person shooter would die on arrival. Even launching day one on Game Pass, there was little hope that a military shooter which looked 10 years out of date would find an audience. However, one thing did intrigue fans and raise expectations considerably, that being the involvement of Remedy Entertainment. Though they were only involved with the single player, the creators of Max Payne and Control naturally brought a level of hype to the project, and with the devs saying that they were inspired by the likes of Metal Gear and Resident Evil, there was the hope that the game would be way more subversive than first thought. Unfortunately, CROSSFIRE X was just as disposable as everyone figured it would be, with bog-standard shooting and bland level design falling short of the developer's own influences. Number 2, Gotham Knights. Of all the games on this list, Gotham Knights is the one that you can still have a lot of fun with, admittedly. The superhero open-world adventure has a lot to admire, with strong character writing, decent combat, and 4 different heroes to play as. Unfortunately, Gotham Knights is disappointing because for everything it gets right, there's a misstep to balance things out. Tragically unbalanced and boring boss battles, a lifeless open world, repetitive side missions, and more plagued the title, which generally felt like it released 6 months too soon, despite already being delayed by a whole year. And then there are the technical issues. Despite cutting ties with last-gen machines, Gotham Knights rarely hit a smooth 30 FPS on consoles, and with graphics that were hardly setting the bar on the new machines, it was unclear what exactly was so next-gen about the game at all. Some people, like our very own Scott Tailford, absolutely love it, and you can see why when isolating certain features. Others, like our very own me, I guess, simply couldn't get past the title's many flaws, and you can't blame them or me either, right? Number 1. The Callisto Protocol. Of all the major games releasing on December 2nd, those being Marvel's Midnight Suns, Need for Speed Unbound, and the Callisto Protocol, nobody expected this long-awaited survival horror title to be bottom of the pile. But as Need for Speed and Midnight Suns received rave reviews and strong word of mouth, there was only one word doing the rounds to describe Callisto, and that was disappointing. Despite dripping with lush next-gen visuals and atmosphere, it became apparent that set dressing was hiding pretty dodgy core gameplay. Attempting to blend classic over-the-shoulder survival horror shooting with a brawler-based melee and dodge system, Callisto's moment-to-moment combat devolves into a cheap and frustrating mess of button mashes and lost progression. Now, games like this are supposed to be hard, of course they are, it's survival horror, but Callisto just takes the piss with unbalanced encounters and horrible checkpointing. Throw in a weak story and so-so level design, and the Callisto Protocol wasn't quite the Dead Space beta that everyone was expecting. So, that's our list. I want to know what you guys think down in the comments below. What do you think about the games that I've included here, and are there any more that disappointed you across 2022? And while you're down there, if you could also please give us a like, share, subscribe, and head over to WhatCulture Gaming for more end-of-the-year lists like this coming out very soon. I've been Josh, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you soon.